We usually think life is a series of random events, different people, different circumstances, different timing. But at some point, many of us start to notice something strange. The situations change, but the emotion we experience feels familiar. Different faces, same dynamics, different relationships, same inner patterns. It's just different environments, but we get that same emotional reactions. And then a question appears. Why does this keep happening? Hello, beautiful souls, and welcome back to another episode with me, your host, Ani. Today, we're digging deeper into something subtle, but in my opinion, pretty life-changing. Why life often feels repetitive, even when everything around us changes. Because if we sit with this question for a moment, it becomes a little unsettling. It's not just that similar things happened, it's that we feel like the same person inside them, the same emotional responses, the same sensitivity in certain situations, the same inner tension in familiar dynamics, almost as if something inside us is quietly recognizing the situation before we consciously understand it. And that raises a even deeper question. If the external world is changing, why does the internal experience stays so consistent? And this is where it gets interesting because most of us think that we are responding freshly to life, moment by moment. But in reality, a large part of our experience is filtered through memory, through pattern the mind has already learned. So we are not just meeting life as it is, we are meeting it through what it reminds us of. And this is also why awakening is not as simple as just understanding something intellectually. We can hear insights, we can recognize patterns, we can even understand our own psychology very, very clearly, but still in real life, the same emotional reactions can appear because insight lives in the mind, but patterns live deeper in the body, in emotional memory, in automatic responses. So there is often a gap between what we understand and what we automatically do. And that gap is exactly where the struggle happens. So awareness makes us see the pattern, but the pattern doesn't disappear just because we see it. And that can feel confusing because part of us thinks, if I understand it, then I can solve this. But understanding is only the beginning, not the transformation itself. And maybe this is why awakening is often uncomfortable. Not because something is going wrong, but because we start to see how automatic we actually are. We begin to notice that many of our reactions happen before thought, that we are not always choosing our responses as freely as we believed. And that realization can be both freeing and confronting at the same time, because once we see that life is not only happening to us, but also happening through patterns inside us, then we can no longer unsee it. And from that point on, the question is no longer just, why is this happening again? But also, what in me recognizes this so quickly that I end up living it again? Let me share a very interesting discovery with you. We like to think we are responding to life in real time, to what is actually happening, to what is right in front of us. But if we look closer, something more subtle is taking place. We are often not responding to the present moment itself. We are responding through patterns built in the past. The brain is not a passive receiver of reality. It is constantly predicting what is happening next based on what has already happened before. It takes fragments of current experience and instantly compares them to memory, to emotional history, to previous meanings, to familiar outcomes. And then it builds a best guess of reality before we even become aware of it. So, what we experience is not pure reality. It is interpreted reality, a filtered version shaped by everything we've lived through up to this point, which means something very important. We are not just seeing what is in front of us, we are also seeing what our mind expects to be there. And this is why two people can live through the same situation and experience it completely differently, not because reality changed, but because the internal pattern interpreting is different. So instead of meeting life as it is, we meet life as we have learned it to be. And this is where it becomes even more subtle. Because over time, these interpretations become so automatic that we no longer notice them as interpretation. They feel like truth, they feel like instinct, they feel like reality itself, which means we don't just walk into new situation, we walk into old emotional templates, wearing new faces, and that is often why life feels repetitive, even when everything on the surface has changed. So, one of the most important principles in the brain is this: familiar does not mean good. Familiar means known. And the mind is not primarily designed to seek what is best for us in the long term. It is designed to seek what is predictable in the short term, because predictability reduces uncertainty, and uncertainty is what the brain interprets as potential risk. So even when life changes externally, internally something deeper may still be guiding us towards what feels emotionally recognizable, not because it is healthy, not because it is aligned or it's fulfilling, but because it is known. And known has a very specific feeling in the body. It doesn't always feel good, but it feels understandable. It feels readable. It feels like something we know how to navigate. And even if that navigation once came with discomfort. And this is why certain emotional dynamics can feel strangely magnetic, but not because we consciously want them, but because the nervous system recognizes them faster than the mind evaluates them. And what is recognized quickly often gets mistaken for what is right. So we can find ourselves drawn into familiar emotional patterns, not because we are choosing repetition, but because the system inside us confuses familiarity with safety, even when the situation itself no longer requires that very same response. And this is also why change can feel so unstable at first, because familiar doesn't automatically feel better. It often feels uncertain, unmapped, unverified. And in that space, the mind leans back towards what it already knows, even if what it knows is limiting. So the real tension is not between good and bad, it's between what is familiar and what is new. And the mind, by default, almost always chooses familiarity first, not because we are stuck, but because we are patterned. And this is where repetition begins. We often assume we are consciously choosing the situation we enter. But in reality, a large part of our navigation through life is not choice in the fully conscious sense. It is recognition. We recognize emotional environments before we analyze them, and we move toward what feels familiar without fully realizing it is happening. The this recognition is not logical, it is immediate. A feeling of, I know this, even when nothing is explicitly the same, because what we are actually recognizing is not the situation itself, but the emotional structure underneath it. For example, If emotional inconsistency was familiar early in life, stability can sometimes feel unfamiliar at first, not unsafe, but strangely unconvincing because the nervous system is not yet calibrated to trust what it hasn't had to adapt to before. If love once required effort, proving, or emotional performance, then ease can feel uncertain instead of safe. Not because is is wrong for you, but because effort became associated with value. So without effort, the system doesn't immediately know how to measure connection. If being overlooked was a familiar emotional background, then attention can feel unfamiliar, not uncomfortable in a painful way, but almost like disorienting, as if something is missing, even when nothing is missing, because the mind is used to scanning for absence, not presence. And slowly, this creates a subtle loop. We don't just respond to people as they are, we respond to the emotional structure they activate inside us. So it can feel like we are making new choices while actually moving through very old emotional pathways, not because we lack awareness, but because recognition often happens faster than reflection. And this is why certain patterns feel so persistent, not because life is repeating externally, but because internally we keep recognizing what we already know how to emotionally navigate, even when it no longer serves us. So life can feel repetitive not because it is fixed, but because the lens through which it is experienced remains familiar. And until that lens shifts, the external world can change as much as it wants. But internally, it may still feel like the same story is unfolding again. When people talk about awakening, it is often misunderstood as something dramatic, sudden, or something is supposed to happen outside of you, as if something opens or something appears or everything changes at once. But in reality, it begins much more quietly than that. It begins with interruption. We start noticing repetition instead of fully living inside it, not as a theory, but as a direct experience in real time. We begin to catch moments like, oh, this reaction feels familiar again. I've been there emotionally before. This response is happening before I even fully think about it. And in that moment, something very subtle shifts. We are no longer fully merged with the pattern. We are no longer completely inside it. We're observing it while it is happening. And that small shift changes the structure of experience itself. Because most of the time, we don't realize we are in a pattern while we are in it. We experience it as truth, as identity, as instinct, as this is how I am. But the moment observation enters, there is a split, not between who we are and who we're not, but between experience and awareness of that experience. And here's what is important to understand: awareness does not instantly erase patterns, it interrupts automatic identification with them. So, in many ways, what we call awakening is not the arrival of something new, but the gradual loosening of that automatic identification with what has always been there. And that loosening begins the moment we see the pattern clearly enough to no longer fully believe we are it. Sometimes it can feel like something is keeping us in cycles, like we understand things clearly, we even see the patterns, but still something doesn't fully shift. And it can start to feel like change is being blocked. But what is actually happening is far more human and far more natural than it first appears to be. The brain and nervous system are built on repetition. They don't update through insight alone. They update through experience repeated over time, through familiarity, through emotional reinforcement, through lived patterns that have been stored, not just understood. So, when we try to change something about ourselves, we're not fighting against something external. We're not breaking out of a system that is holding us. We are updating internal wiring that was built slowly over time through repetition. And anything built through repetition cannot dissolve instantly through understanding. It has to be repatterned, not forced, not rushed, but gradually recognized through new experiences that feel safe enough to integrate. And this is why change often feels slow, because the system is learning something new while still holding on to what is familiar. And the nervous system does not abandon familiarity quickly, because familiarity has always been its definition of safety. So, in many ways, what we experience as resistance is not opposition, it's a lag, the natural delay between awareness and integration. And once we see this clearly, something starts to soften. We stop interpreting slowness as failure, and we begin to understand it as transition, a system adjusting itself in real time, which is not broken, it's just updating. So the real shift is not about forcing different outcomes. It is not about trying harder or becoming someone entirely different. It is much quieter than that. It is about seeing the pattern while it is happening. Because the moment we see it clearly, we are no longer fully inside it in the same way. Something in us steps slightly outside of that automatic reaction. May not be fully, not permanently at first, but enough to create that space. And in that space, something very subtle becomes possible. We're no longer only being carried by that pattern, we are also observing it as it unfolds. And what we can see with awareness, we can eventually stop repeating unconsciously, not through force, but through recognition. So maybe the question was never why does life keeps repeating itself, but instead, why am I familiarizing so deeply that I experience it as reality? Because the moment we begin to see the pattern, we're no longer only living it, we are also beginning to step outside of it. That shift, however subtle it is at first, changes everything. So, my lovelies, I want to thank you for being here and for going into this with me again. If this resonated with you, don't forget to share your thoughts. I really appreciate them more than you can imagine. And until next time, stay bold, stay fierce, and always go beyond the mind.